Malaysian girl, you got dressed up for your favorite bus concert. Everything's going great until some Korean fans and masters take out the professional cameras, which is not allowed. They refuse to leave, things get loud, then physical. They end up getting dragged out. Clips spreads everywhere and somehow triggers full-scale war between siblings and Korean netizens. Now, Southeast Asia coming together over anything is kind of unusual. Malaysia and Indonesia have been fighting over batik. The Philippines and Malaysia have the whole Sabah dispute. These countries don't exactly hold hands on a regular basis. At least they are not exactly siblings. But this time, they all showed up on the same side almost immediately. And that's the thing that actually got me thinking, because this clearly wasn't just about a camera, right? I don't want to just recap what happened, because if we want to talk about this one incident, the next time something like this happens again, we're still gonna have no idea why. So let's talk about where this grudge actually comes from. To understand this, you have to start inside Korea itself. And before I get into it, I'm not talking about all Koreans here. Racism in Korea is real. The UN has cut it out, and so has Korea's Human Rights Commission. But that doesn't mean every Korean's like this, okay? So y'all just relax. What we are really talking about is Korea's ultra-nationalist crowd, and if you need a way to picture it, it's almost the same energy as white supremacy, just centered around Koreans instead. Who's a real Korean, who belongs, who doesn't, they care about this a lot. And this didn't come out of nowhere. Korean society has always had a pretty rigid internal hierarchy, and it doesn't even start with foreigners. It starts within Korea itself. Koreans versus overseas Koreans, Seoul versus Jibang, the rich versus the poor. There's always been a ranking system. So when that internal hierarchy gets pointed outward, it turns into a superiority complex toward the Asian neighbors. And in far-right spaces, that's exactly what you see. On top of that, for generations, Koreans were taught that they were one pure ethnic people. One bloodline, one nation. That national pride runs so deep that acknowledging discrimination for many feels like attacking the identity they were raised to be proud of. Now, here's something most people skip. The single pure ethnic nation idea that Koreans grew up with is actually a modern invention. Stanford sociology professor Shin-gyu points out that this concept didn't even exist during the Joseon dynasty. It emerged during Japanese colonial rule in the early 20th century. Koreans emphasized their distinct ethnic identity specifically to differentiate themselves from the Japanese. That tendency peaked in the 1920s and 30s, then got reinforced against under Park Chung-hee's government in the 1960s and 70s, when the regime tied national consciousness to modernization. This ideology wasn't removed from Korean textbooks until 2007. And also the pure blood identity Koreans take pride in doesn't actually hold up genetically. Research shows that over 70% of Korean genetic diversity comes from population mixing, with a significant portion tracing back to Southeast Asia. The genetic connection to Southeast Asians runs a lot deeper than they can ever imagine. So here's how the ranking actually works. And to understand it, you need a little bit of context on how it got here. Before the 1990s, Korean social order was basically binary. Koreans and everyone else, that's it. The industrialization created a labor shortage, and the Korean government started bringing migrant workers, mostly from Southeast Asia, to fill what they called the 3D jobs. Dirty, dangerous, difficult, the work Koreans didn't want to do. Then from 2000s onward, international marriages increased. That simple binary slowly turned into a 3-tier system you see today. At the top, Korean-born pure-blood Koreans, that's your baseline. Then you have overseas Koreans, Korean Americans, and so on. Same blood, but you grew up somewhere else. You don't fully get the language, the culture, the unspoken social rules, the way things work. Your Koreanness might be off. If you're missing those, the blood only gets you so far. Never quite fully one of us. Kind of a tier 1.5 situation. Unless you are from the US or Europe. You speak fluent English, you look the part, and you also speak Korean. Suddenly, the Western background flips into a shining point. Congrats, you'll basically be updated to an elite kpop.
All due disrespect, if you're a Korean person judging another Korean person for not being able to speak Korean fluently, you suck. Imagine going to Korea and then judging someone who lives in Korea and has only lived in Korea their entire life and saying, you can't fucking speak English? Because it's the same energy. There are apps you can teach yourself. Why do you care? It's a weird gatekeeping from the Korean community in America. It's the same thing with the fight against mixed Koreans. Well, I have 2 fully Korean parents, so I am more Korean than you, and I speak fluent Korean, and I eat kimchi with every meal, and I'm making my own fucking doenjang. If your concern is about losing Korean identity and culture, use the time and energy that you're spending judging Koreans in another country and focus that into Korea itself and figuring out why people aren't having babies. Why the birth rate in Korea is rapidly declining. Because that should be concerning to all of us.
If you're East Asian, lighter skin, similar style, decent Korean, you might get an honorary Korean trophy. Same concept as honorary white in Western context. Now here's a detail that I think really shows how this works. Korea's attitude toward mixed race people depends actually on which kind of mix you are. Korean white mixed people have their own word, 혼혈, generally accepted, sometimes even considered desirable, especially in entertainment. But Korean Southeast Asian mixed people are called 다문화, and they are treated as outsiders. Same idea of being mixed race, completely different treatment depending on where the other parent is from. And at the bottom, Southeast Asians, South Asians, black people. Researchers who study Korea's racial hierarchy actually have a term for this group, the collective dark. But here's the part most people don't think about. Why does the tier system look like this? Why does skin tone track so directly with where you end up? Because there's another layer to this. Korea's far right doesn't just look down on the collective dark, they also look up to the West. Korea's preference for lighter skin actually predates any Western influence. Historically, it was about class. Educated elites stay indoors, they had lighter skin. Laborers worked out in the sun, they had darker skin. Western beauty standards didn't create this, they just plug into something that was already there. When Western influence arrived, it merged with the existing logic. English became a status symbol, Western-looking features became desirable, and the two just reinforced each other. And you can see this clearly in beauty standards. Higher nose bridges, bigger eyes, smaller faces, got attached to higher status within the system. So people pursuing these features through surgery ain't necessarily thinking I want to be white. They are thinking in this hierarchy, these features can help me move up. It's the same logic as buying a luxury brand. You are not trying to become French. You are buying into what a symbol represents. Seoul National University sociology professor Kim Seok-koo ran surveys in both 2008 and 2018, and the conclusion didn't change over a decade. Koreans were most welcoming toward Americans and Europeans, and felt the greatest social distance from Southeast Asians and Chinese. He also found that Koreans with higher economic and educational backgrounds were actually more negative toward people from low-income countries. In other words, the more successful a Korean is, the more entrenched this hierarchy tends to be, which is quite impressive. So the full picture looks like this. White people at the top, Koreans in the middle telling themselves they're the closest Asian equivalent, and the Southeast Asians at the bottom, doubly excluded. You are not one of us, you are not what we want to be either. Korea needs migrant workers, that's not a secret. An aging population, rising living standards, and younger generations not wanting to do physical work means someone has to fill these jobs. And a huge portion of that labor comes from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. A lot of these people paid anywhere from $1,000 to several $1,000s just in visa and agency fees to get there. Some go into debt before they even landed. They came with the idea that Korean could be a chance to build something, send money home, maybe change their family situation, and then they got there. The UN's Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, their 2025 report found that Korea has been underpaying foreign workers by over 100 billion won every single year since 2019. Amnesty International has documented wage theft, physical abuse, and contract fraud as widespread issues. Korea has a system for managing low-skilled foreign workers called EPS, Employment Permit System. Sounds official, sounds protective, but the problem is that it severely limits how many times a worker can change employers, and it needs the employer's permission to do so, which means your employer knows you are not going anywhere. So when workers try to leave after getting hurt or mistreated, they often get punished. A bad boss can mess with you however they want, cutting your hours, holding back your pay, bullying you, just making your life as difficult as possible. Signing a contract is basically a gamble. You just have to hope you end up with a decent boss. Your employer basically decides whether you can stay in Korea or not. So no worker can afford to get on their bad side. A Cambodian woman told media that she was working 11-hour days, taking home 900,000 won a month, and being charged 500,000 of that just to sleep in a share room inside a greenhouse. Providing housing seems like a benefit. It often becomes a way for employers to claw back wages that should have been paid in full. And what's being provided often doesn't meet basic living standards. At best, some workers end up in semi-basements or rooftop rooms. At worst, they are living in greenhouses, side cabins, or right next to livestock.
This whole place is an illegal temporary building that breaks several safety codes. The walls are built out of vinyl and plastic, and if you see in here, this is built out of polystyrene foam and shipping containers. This room is used both as a kitchen and a shower room, but as you can see, the ventilation is very poor in here, and the place quickly filled up with smoke after cooking.
The room is damp and thick with the smell of fungus and mold.
A plastic porta potty generally costs around $200. They didn't even bother to place a $200 porta potty here and gave workers a bathroom that you could only see in the 50s or 60s in South Korea.
Sometimes the only time things change is when something goes viral. In that sense, being discovered is almost a form of luck. In a widely shared video, a migrant worker was tied up and lifted by a forklift, being humiliated on the camera. The backlash was so strong that even President Lee Jae-myung had to step in.
South Korea's president vowed on Thursday to thoroughly punish this barbaric human rights abuse against the socially vulnerable, referring to the incident in Naju. Earlier that day, Lee Jae-myung posted the video on his social media saying, "I could not believe my eyes watching this." Lee said it is hard to believe this happened in a cultured country with a strong democratic foundation.
But many people never get that kind of a luck. In December 2020, a 31-year-old Cambodian worker was living in a plastic greenhouse in Gyeonggi-do with no heating. She didn't make through that winter. In January 2026, the same month this whole online war was happening, South Korea's Supreme Court finally ruled that the government owed her family an apology and a compensation. It had taken 5 years. Pig farms are also one of the most dangerous places for migrant workers. On the one hand, the environment itself is high risk. Toxic gases from animal waste can build up quickly in the workplaces. On the other hand, there is often a lack of property safety standards, along with mismanagement and in some cases, outright abuse. All of these combined make pig farms a toxic place where fatal incidents keep happening. For example, a Thai migrant worker in his 60s working in Bucheon died while raising over 1,000 pigs for his employer. He had been living in a makeshift room next to the pig farm, walls covered in mold, and in extremely poor condition. But the exact cause of his death was never clearly determined, and it's hard to say whether this long-term exposure to that kind of environment played a key role. And that kind of uncertainty isn't unusual. A 2024 report found that around 40% of migrant worker deaths were classified under other, which means the cause of death was never clearly identified. In other words, many people died far from home without even a clear explanation of how they died. As mentioned earlier, the legal system doesn't effectively protect these foreign workers either. Under the EPS system, the employer's power over workers is enormous. In many ways, they control whether a foreign worker can stay, leave, or even seek help. At this point, you might hear a familiar counter-argument. These foreigners come here, work illegally, overstay their visas, drive a crime. Of course, Koreans have a problem with them, but that doesn't hold up any data. Crime rates are calculated per 100,000 people, so population size already accounted for. Data from the Korean Institute of Criminology shows that foreign residents have about half the crime rate of Korean nationals. In 2024, police data shows that Koreans commit crimes at more than twice the rate. So they are not as dangerous as many Koreans imagine. If anything, they are more vulnerable. Foreign workers make up just 3.5% of the workforce, but account for 13% of workplace deaths. As for undocumented workers, yes, the issue does exist, but the system itself plays a major role in creating this. Under EPS, workers need an employer's approval to change jobs. If anything goes wrong at any point, they got trapped in the cycle. Even though you're in bad working conditions, there's always no way to leave. So if you speak up, you'll risk retaliation or deportation. If you walk away, and you will lose everything you pay just to get here. So when people finally run, they become illegal, and then that gets used as proof that they were the problem all along. What makes this even more striking is that Korea has signed multiple international agreements on protecting migrant workers, and yet to this day, there's still no comprehensive anti-discrimination law in place. UN raised this issue back in 2015. It's still unresolved a decade later. Most migrant workers come to Korea through the E9 visa and get trapped in the EPS system. But many Southeast Asian women take a different path. Through marriage. Starting in the 1990s, rural Korea faced a severe gender imbalance. Young women moved to the cities while many men in rural areas were left behind, unable to find a spouse. Local governments began subsidizing international marriages, providing financial support for men to find and marry women from Southeast Asia. Women from Vietnam, the Philippines, and Cambodia were introduced through marriage agencies and moved to Korea. By 2019, there were over 280,000 foreign wives in Korea. More than 70% of them from China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and the Philippines. They came with the promise of a stable life, but the reality isn't always K-drama. A 2017 survey by Korea's National Human Rights Commission found that over 42% of foreign wives reported experiencing domestic violence, including physical, verbal, sexual, and economic abuse. For comparison, the figure for Korean women was 29%. On paper, marriage offers a path to permanent residency, even citizenship, but in practice, the system creates another form of dependency. Just as migrant workers cannot change employers without consent, if a marriage breaks down, a foreign wife must leave South Korea unless she can prove the breakdown was her husband's fault or that she was a victim of abuse. The system, in effect, concentrates power in the hands of the Korean spouse. Just like in the labor system, your status is tied to someone else. And when leaving comes with a cost, people are more likely to stay silent, even in situations they shouldn't have to endure. In that sense, you could argue that many women simply took a different visa to the different kind of the job just happened to be playing the role of good, compliant wife. When Korean fans told Southeast Asians to go support their own artists, they revealed something underlying they probably didn't mean to, that they don't actually think the Southeast Asian market matters. The data tells a different story. According to industry reports from K-pop Radar, Southeast Asia has been the primary engine behind K-pop's global expansion. In 2025, 3 of the top 10 K-pop consumer markets in the world were Southeast Asian. Indonesia at 3rd, Thailand at 6th, and the Philippines at 10th. For artists like Blackpink, BTS, and 17, Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila, and Kuala Lumpur are not optional tour stops, they are actually essential ones. So where does the "they don't spend money" impression come from? Because the industry has long measured fan value through metrics like physical album sales, Korean charts, and the Japanese market. And that's simply not where Southeast Asian fans spend. Their money goes to concert tickets, merchandise, fan-organized birthday projects, support advertisements, streaming memberships, and online voting. In many Southeast Asian countries, a single album plus shipping can cost several days' wages. Before platforms like Shopee and Lazada, there just wasn't the same kind of retail system you see in Korea, Japan, or China. Buying albums wasn't just expensive, it was a pain. So by album sales, Southeast Asia looks weak. By touring revenue, social media traffic, and Spotify numbers, it's one of the most important markets in the world. And many companies now treat it as an important touring market. The money is real. It just flows into parts of the ecosystem that the traditional metrics were never designed to see. There's a specific culture with Korean fandom known as fans and masters. These are fans who invest heavily in professional equipment, treating photographing their idols as a kind of privilege, even a status symbol. In some cases, not even really fans at all, but people making money off these photos. For many Southeast Asian fans, this is exactly where the problem is. On the surface, it looks like Korean fan culture, specifically the fans and master system, being placed above local rules. But essentially, there's a structural reality that's harder to ignore. Korea exports the content, Southeast Asia consumes it, but this has never been treated as an exchange between equals. It functions more like a brand and its customers, and the customers don't always get a say. That long-standing imbalance is what fuels conflicts like this. The imbalance has always been there. In the labor system, in cross-border marriages, in fan culture, in the unspoken hierarchy that placed Southeast Asia at the bottom. The only difference is, before it was fragmented. Each country had its own frustrations toward Korea, but now there's something connecting them.